The 2020 candidates are fighting for a spot in the September Democratic debate. The second round of contenders battled each other last night in Detroit.
Former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris faced most of the attacks. Candidates challenged Biden's moderate policies on health care and immigration, while others targeted Harris's record on criminal justice.
Joe Biden told wealthy donors that nothing fundamentally would change if he were president. Kamala Harris said she's not trying to restructure society. Well, I am.
The people in this room and the Democrats watching tonight are the last best hope for humanity on this planet.
We need to do the opposite of much of what we're doing right now, and the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes masks.
The cost of doing nothing is far too expensive.
The truth about healthcare in America today is people can't afford it.
What I don't believe is that the profit motive of big pharma or big insurance companies should ever determine in our great nation whether somebody gets health care or not.
How about we be the party that's going to disrupt the status quo for working people?
This idea is a bunch of malarkey.
There's a saying in my community, you're dipping into the Kool-Aid and you don't even know the flavor.
It looks like one of us has learned the lessons of the past and one of us hasn't.
Immigrants are being scapegoated for issues they have nothing to do with in our economy.
We can no longer allow a white nationalist to be in the White House.
Mr. Vice President, you can't have it both ways. You invoke President Obama more than anybody in this campaign. You can't do it when it's convenient and then dodge it when it's not.
The president's racist rhetoric should be enough grounds for everybody in this country to vote him out of office.
If you want to compare records, and frankly, I'm shocked that you do.
The first thing that I'm going to do when I'm president is I'm going to Clorox the Oval Office.
He betrayed American families.
Let's remind the American people who we are, why we are Democrats, and why we're running for president.
All right, let's break this all down with our CBS News 2020 campaign reporters, Nicole Sganga, LaCrai Mitchell, and Adam Brewster. They're joining us from the key battleground states, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Iowa. So, Nicole, let me start with you first. In Manchester, New Hampshire, what are you hearing from voters there? What stood out to them across last night's debate?
Well, Vlad, one thing that resonated with a lot of New Hampshire voters here is a line you played earlier by New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. He told the former Vice President Joe Biden, quote, "You're dipping into the Kool-Aid and you don't even know the flavor." Of course, he was talking about criminal justice reform, and his argument resonated here amongst voters. Another thing he mentioned during the 20-minute-long debate about health care was that the enemy here is not differences within the Democratic Party, but rather the administration of President Donald Trump and what Republicans are trying to do with health care. He got a lot of cheers for that amongst New Hampshire voters. Voters, we should keep in mind, are also picturing these candidates on stage next to President Donald Trump. So they want to make sure that they can handle the heat. Now, not all candidates got the opportunity to be tested. Two candidates that did, former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris. Now, most folks I spoke with said that the former vice president did hold his own, but he is appearing to be a little bit old, perhaps even frail on stage, not keeping up quite as much. Senator Kamala Harris, of course, voters telling me that she tried to keep up as well, but didn't quite land a punch like she did in the first debate. The other underdog moment that we saw, Governor Jay Inslee, who brought up two issues that are really important here in the Granite State. The first being mental health. Here in New Hampshire, the opioid epidemic is still very relevant, top of mind for a number of folks here. Fourth highest rate of opioid-related deaths in the country here in New Hampshire. A lot of PTSD experienced by a population of veterans. There's 10% veterans here in New Hampshire. Also, the environment. The last thing I heard after the first Democratic debate was we want to hear more about the environment. And certainly Governor Inslee hit on those points, referring back to Washington State in his remarks yesterday.
Thank you. And LaCrai, former Vice President Joe Biden has been the front runner there in South Carolina, especially when it comes to gaining the black vote. However, he's faced a lot of criticism for his performances in this debate. What are you hearing from voters this morning?
He has faced criticism, and what I'm hearing from voters here is that although he had more fire than he did in the previous debates, he still came up a little short. And voters did acknowledge that he was taking heat from a lot of different candidates, but they said that it didn't really move the needle for them last night, his performance, that is. And so, you know, all in all, what I think it's important to remember, though, is that even though he didn't have this breakout performance, voters were telling me people who were already supporting him didn't walk away feeling like they wouldn't support him now because of his debate performance. So, you know, he didn't necessarily push them over the edge, but he didn't turn them away either, which I think is important to recognize.
So, Adam, let me go over to you in Iowa. One of the moments that I thought was sort of really interesting came from a candidate who hasn't been a frontrunner. That was Senator Michael Bennet, when he talked about the fact that these Democrats on the stage were arguing about things that happened 50 years ago. In one case, it was around busing, and he talked about school segregation still being a factor in 2019. So I wonder what voters in Iowa thought. Iowa, of course, the caucuses are in February 2020. It's the first big test for Democrats. What did they have to tell you?
It is the first big test for Democrats, Vlad. It's where people will have to show up and make a big mark if they want to continue through this primary process. A few people last night did cheer that sort of rhetoric about we shouldn't be attacking each other so much, and can't forget that we will eventually have to face President Trump and the Republicans. As for the issues, bringing up issues from the past from 50 years ago, I had one woman tell me she's 100% in for Joe Biden right now last night, and said these issues that they're bringing up from the past simply don't matter anymore. Another person echoed that same sentiment. And a few people said that they thought the vice president stood his ground, had a much stronger performance, and felt as if that they could picture him standing up to President Trump in a debate, something they didn't feel after the first debate, after he took that blow from Kamala Harris and seemed kind of shaken. I think he shored up his standing last night and showed people that he can stand up to President Trump, which is one of the issues people in Iowa, or Democrats in Iowa, I should say, really put above all else, along with the other issues like health care and climate change.
And Nicole, I want to go back to you. How have these latest debates shifted the dynamic among the candidates as they move forward and fight for the nomination? I think about that moment when Vice President Joe Biden grabbed Cory Booker and said something to him about, if you are the president, and Cory Booker says, well, thank you for that endorsement. How are the dynamics shifting after that second debate?
Well, absolutely, and I actually just got off the phone with Senator Cory Booker's team. They will be making a lot of calls today, they told me, reaching out to supporters. What you saw last night was Act 1. Now comes Act 2, and that is ground game, and we are going to see the campaigns that actually have a presence here on the ground. Campaigns like Senator Elizabeth Warren, former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Bernie Sanders, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, calling up their supporters, knocking on doors, and capitalizing on their key debate moments. The other dynamic to pay attention to, Senator Elizabeth Warren had a strong showing and got a lot of support from Democrats here in the Granite State on the first night of the debates. Last night, names that I kept hearing over and over again, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who had a lot to say about white privilege and women in this state, Senator Kamala Harris, who voters say kept her own. The question about electability in the wake of 2016 and the loss of Secretary Hillary Clinton is melting away. Voters that were initially concerned by what a female nominee, what that person could do on stage with Donald Trump, are no longer concerned, and they're telling me that, if anything, seeing a female nominee on that stage would be sweet justice against a president they feel has a number of accusations and a record with women against him. The other thing to keep in mind here in New Hampshire is that voters are used to electing women. They elected the first all-female congressional delegation that was sent to Washington, D.C. They have the only 2 female senators who have also served as governor. And so those concerns about electability and likability that we're hearing about are slowly disappearing in the Granite State.
All right, let me ask you a question, LaCrai, because Donald Trump won South Carolina 54%. He crushed Hillary Clinton in the general election. And what I saw, and I think what Nicole was echoing, is a lot of people saying that the vice president was able to sort of stabilize what had been a slow descent. In other words, people were starting to lose some of that enthusiasm. But as Major Garrett pointed out on CBS this morning, he's perhaps stabilized his campaign. But I remember back in 2015, a lot of stable campaigns. Jeb Bush, Jeb exclamation point, Bush. I also remember Mitt Romney. And what I'm trying to suggest is that these sort of candidates that represent sort of an older model of campaigning, an older model of debate, may not last against a pugilist, a fighter like President Trump, who when he gets on that campaign stage and that debate stage, he may not be armed with a lot of facts, but he lands a lot of body blows. Is Joe Biden up to that task?
Vlad, I think you have brought up an excellent point, and it is this. It is not going to be enough for him to have been the favorite in years past. Former Vice President Joe Biden is going to have to show voters here, even people who support him, that he is up to task for a fight. And what I'm hearing is, while he looked sharper last night, he's still not as sharp as he will need to be to make a sort of case for himself in the general election. And to that case, when I asked people who they thought were the standouts for both nights, his name did not come up. It did not come up. You had Senator Warren's name come up, you had Senator Booker's name come up, and you had former HUD Secretary Castro's name come up. But former Vice President Biden's name did not come up, and I do think there's a case to be made about him going to have to come and bring a little more for the next debate to show even his supporters that he's up for the task. You know, that moment last night when former HUD Secretary Castro called him out on immigration, that was a moment that stuck with people here. Voters said that that was definitely a standout moment for them, and former Vice President Biden didn't look the strongest at that moment. You know, another person who has made a few visits here, and we haven't mentioned her in terms of South Carolina this morning, is Senator Kamala Harris. And I had a voter tell me last night that people thought she looked visibly shaken at points. And so some of these people who have been, you know, in the tops of the polls here in the Palmetto State, I think they're going to have to bring a little bit more for this next debate to prove to their supporters here that they're up to task.
And Adam, to you, last question here. We know that the next big debate is in September, but what are the candidates there in Iowa? How do they move forward in Iowa with those voters?
Well, Jerika, the key in Iowa and the key to the caucus is ground game, right? As people like to say here, you have to turn out your supporters on a cold, nasty night in February. And that comes down to organization. You have to get people willing to stand up in front of their neighbors and say who they support. So August will be a really busy month here in Iowa. Of course, the Iowa State Fair kicks off next week. That'll bring 21 Democrats to the state. There's also a big event in northern Iowa called the Wing Ding that many of them are going to. So they'll get a lot of chance to spend time with voters here in Iowa. And to echo what Nicole said, there are campaigns here who have a large presence on the ground. Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders, Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Kamala Harris kind of stand out as having larger teams than many of the other candidates. And some of them have been here for a while. Senator Warren and Senator Booker have had teams here since early in the year and have been able to start building support, especially Senator Warren. They've seen that pay off on the ground. Senator Booker's team has been looking for kind of a moment to capitalize on. I think we'll see if there was something from that debate last night that will fire up his supporters. But the candidates who don't have large teams on the state, it becomes difficult at points to really reach out and connect with caucus goers when your candidate isn't in the state. And that'll be something that is critical heading into Labor Day and the next debate as candidates try to meet that donor and that polling threshold.
That's a great point. Folks, you're looking at our CBS News 2020 campaign reporters, Nicole Sganga, LaCrai Mitchell, and Adam Brewster. Excellent reporting, guys. We'll be talking to you a lot.